So tomorrow's test is on all of chapter 5. There are going to be 16 questions on the test. Of those 16 questions, you will have 2 proofs that you are writing the entire thing yourself. So you need to make sure that you know all of the shortcuts in order to prove triangles are congruent, and then also know how to apply lesson 7, which was the CPCTC shortcut. Okay, so there are no multiple choice questions. They are all free response questions, as well as the proofs you're writing the entire thing yourself. So what we're going to do now is also remember that don't just focus on the reviews that I've posted. Go back. The warm-ups are an excellent addition to use to review, as well as your notes and the homework. So use all the resources that you have to get ready for this chapter 5 test. So again, don't just focus on this review that was homework due this morning. You need to also go back and supplement this review with your warm-ups, with your notes, with your homework. But I'm going to go through each individual question to make sure that you understand what was taught in each one of the lessons. So I'm going to go ahead and zoom in here. So this was the first page, or the top of the first page, and this is where we started learning about the angles of the triangle and how to classify them based on either their angle measures or their side lengths. Now, for number 1, notice there's no numbers there, just congruency marks, and it asks you to classify it based on its angles and its sides. If I give you a question and ask you to classify it based on its angle measures, I'm going to give you some numbers there, one way or another. So this one might have been a bit challenging if you didn't recognize that all 3 of those angles were less than 90, which would have made number 1, classifying it both by sides and by its angle measures. Sides were easy. We had the 2 congruency marks, which made this an isosceles triangle. And then if you approximated each of the angles, you could have also seen that these are, it appears to be an acute isosceles triangle. But again, I will give you information about angle measures. You're not going to have to look at it and say, oh, it looks like it might be less than 90. It's going to have something in there where you're going to know it. All right, the next one, numbers 2 and 3. We're going to be using our exterior angle theorem. And remember, that theorem stated that the measure of the exterior angle, which over here is x, is going to equal the sum of the 2 non-adjacent, it can't be the one next to it, remote non-interior, the 2 non-remote interior angles, meaning these 2. So that's going to be the sum of these 2. So I'm going to add 46 and 86, and that's going to give me the value of x. So once I add these 2 angles together, I get 132. So x equals 132 degrees. I'm going to do exactly the same thing on number 3, but instead of just angle measures in degrees, I've got expressions that I need to solve. So I'm going to set up an algebraic equation. And again, the sum of these 2 remote non-adjacent interior angles, when I add them, it's going to equal the exterior angle. So the equation I'm going to set up to solve is going to be 45 plus 5x equals 9x plus 9. I need to get my like terms together. I can move the 9x to the other side. You can also move the 5. It really doesn't matter. And then you get 45 minus 4x equals 9. Subtract the 45. Negative 4x is going to equal 36, negative 36. Divide by negative 4, and x equals 9. Now, it didn't ask me to find the value of x. It asked me to find the measure of the exterior angle. This was the question that a lot of people messed up on the quiz because they just found x. They didn't plug it back in. And remember, your exterior angle is this 9x plus 9. So now I need to use that 9x plus 9. I'm going to replace x with what I just found x to equal. So now I'm going to do 9 times 9 plus 9. 9 times 9 is 81 plus 9. And the measure of the exterior angle is going to be 90 degrees. Now remember, you can never assume if it's a right angle or not, but now that I've done that calculation, I can see that it's a right angle. Now for the next ones, number 4 and 5, this is where I'm going to use my triangle sum theorem, and I know that the 3 angles of a triangle are going to add up to be 180. However, we learned a corollary to that theorem, and remember we also learned that the 2 acute angles of a right triangle are always complementary. So we could actually solve number 4 and 5 2 different ways. We can either use the triangle sum, and what we would have done for that one is we would have added 8x plus 7x plus 90 and set it equal to 180 because that's what the 3 angles of the triangle add up to be. So I would add 8 and 7. Then I would have to subtract the 90 from 180. And I get 15x is equal to 90. Divide by 15. And x equals 6. The other way is to use that corollary. And I know that these are 2 acute angles are going to equal 90. So the other way would have just been to set the 2 acute angles equal to 90. And I could have gotten the same answer either way. I get x equals 6. Now again, it didn't ask for x. It asked us to find the measure of each acute angle. So now what I need to do is plug in 6 for x. So 8 times 6. The first acute angle is 48. And then my second acute angle will be 7 times 6. And this one will be 42. For number 5, I can do exactly the same thing. To simplify my process, I'm just going to add the 2 expressions and set it equal to 90. I'm going to use the corollary on this one. So 7x plus 6 plus 6x minus 7, and I'm going to set it equal to 90. You can also set it equal to 180, but you have to put in the plus 90 into your equation. So I'm going to add my like terms. I get 13x. I can also add the 6 and the negative 7, I get negative 1. I need to add 1. I get 13x equals 91. Divide by 13, and x equals 7. Now it asks for each acute angle, so now I got to plug it in. So I'm going to come up here, 7 times 7 plus 6, 49 plus 6, and my first acute angle is going to be 55. And then the other one will be 6 times 7 minus 7. So 42 minus 7. And this is going to give me 35. Now remember, these 2 angles that you just found, these are complements. One way you can check to see if you did it right is you could go back and add them, and they should equal 90 degrees. If not, you've done something wrong. Now, for the next part, this is where we were introduced to finding that 2 figures were congruent. And at the beginning of the chapter, we didn't know any shortcuts. So we would have had to have shown that all of the angles had a corresponding congruent match and all of the sides. So when it's a triangle, we're looking for 3 angle measures that are congruent and then 3 side lengths. When it's a quadrilateral, like number 6, we're looking for 4 pieces. Now, when they give you a congruency statement, that's going to be key so you can tell what angle matches where as well as what sides. So if I zoom on in here to my congruency statement for number 6, notice the first letter is G, and it's going to match with the first letter in the second quadrilateral, which is L. That will be my first statement, that angle G is congruent to angle L, And notice in the figure, they've got the same congruency mark. Now, if you notice, M had the same marking. So this is where the congruency statement pays off. So now if I go to H, it's the second letter, and it's going to match with the second letter over here. So H and M are the match. So then I would state that angle H is congruent to angle M. And then I can do it with the third letter, which is going to be the J, and it's going to match with the N. So angle J congruent to angle N. And then finally the last one, K and P are also going to match. Now I've matched all 4 angles in my quadrilateral. Now I have to go back and match the 4 sides. And again, I can use that statement. It makes it a lot easier. So if I zoom in here, the first 2 letters, GH, are going to match with LM. So GH had this single tick mark here, and so did LM, which was right here. So I would write GH is congruent to LM. I can keep going and taking them 2 at a time. So HJ, the second and the third, will match with the second and the third here. So HJ congruent to MN. And then lastly, the JK, the last 2, JK will be congruent to NP. And then I still need the beginning and the end. So GK congruent to LP. And this is my 4 sides and my 4 angle pairs. Now, on the test, I'm not going to make you do this because we've now learned the shortcuts. So you're going to be able to use the shortcuts and not have to list every single match. Now, if they ask you to find a missing angle and you're told that you have congruent figures, then I'm going to look for the same symbols. So notice here, angle S and angle T have the same marking. So that tells me angle T here is also going to be 74 degrees. And now they wanted me to find the measure of angle V. This is where I'm going to use my triangle sum. So I can either say angle V, the measure of angle V, plus 74 plus 90 equals 180. I can do it that way. Or I could have also just known that they're complements, and I could do the measure of angle V plus 74 equals 90. And what I'm going to do here is I can add these 2 together, and then I can get 164. And then to find the measure of angle V, I subtract 164. And then the measure of angle V is going to be 16 degrees. Now, if I did it using this equation, all I'm doing is subtracting 74 from both sides, and I still get the same answer, 16. So either use the theorem or the corollary, either one, it doesn't matter. But we look for the congruent matches. So for number 8, now, notice the instructions here. So they gave an example of writing a proof using side angle side, but notice in the instructions on 8 and 9, it says decide whether enough information is given to prove that triangle WXZ is congruent to YZX using side angle side. And if you could, they ask you to write a proof. On the test, since we learned all 5 shortcuts, instead, the instructions are just going to say, decide which shortcut you can use to prove the triangles are congruent. And it's going to list them all. It'll list side angle side, side side side, hypotenuse leg, angle angle side, and angle side angle. So it's not going to say, can you use side angle side or not? It's going to say which one of the 5 can you use. And it won't say write a proof for it. It's just going to say which shortcut can you use. Later on, the proofs will be set up with the box for you. All right, so for number 8, it wants to know, is there enough information and they're actually telling us which one we should try to use. And notice I've been given two pieces of information. The only other thing I can come up with on my own is this side that the two triangles share, this reflexive side. However, this is not enough information because in order to use side angle side, the angle that would have needed to have been marked would have been this one down here and this one up here. So the way it's pictured, there is not enough information to prove that these are congruent. So not enough on this one. The next one, number 9. Next one, what's given to me here is I do have parallel lines here. I'm also given that these sides are congruent. I could also bring in my reflexive side. I can also use this reflexive side as a transversal because I've got parallel lines, which then would have created a pair of alternate interior angles. However, the way that the congruency marks are in my picture, it is not enough information to prove the two triangles are congruent using side angle side because the angles that are marked, the alternate interior, are not the included angle. So this one is also not congruent. However, if I would have been given that this angle up here was congruent to this one down here, then I could have used side angle side and I could have written a proof. But the way it was pictured, there was not enough information. Then the next part, this is where we learned about, if you were given the blue, not only could we do side angle side, we could also do angle side angle. So we would have had to have been given the blue were congruent. We could not have come up with that congruency based on what the original picture looked like. Okay, next lesson was equilateral and isosceles triangles. This is where we learned the base angles theorem and the converse of the base angles theorem. Remember, when you're given that the two sides are congruent, then you can prove that the two angles opposite them are also congruent. And then the converse of that is you're going to be starting out with the congruent base angles, and then from there, you can say that the sides opposite them are also congruent. Okay, so here again, we learned the base angles theorem and the converse of the base angles theorem. We also learned two corollaries to those theorems that stated that if a triangle is equilateral, then it's also equiangular. And then the reverse of that, if it's equiangular, then it's equilateral. So I'm going to go ahead and take these questions one by one. So number 10, it says copy and complete the statement. So it says if QP is congruent to QR, then which angles are congruent? So the triangle that I'm referring to is this one right here. I can pull it apart. And then by my base angles theorem, I know that these angles opposite those two congruent sides are congruent. Now I can name angle P with just one letter. However, where the R is, I need to use 3 letters to name that because there's a whole bunch of different angles there that have R as the vertex. So I would need to have named that angle QRP or PRQ. R would have needed to be in the middle. Now my next piece of given information from number 11 is going to be that angle TRV. Go ahead and find that one. TRV, this angle right here, is congruent to TVR. And again, I can highlight the triangle where those two angles are located. And again, I'm going to use this time I'm going to use the converse of the base angles theorem. And when I have two congruent base angles, then the sides opposite those congruent base angles are also congruent. So the statement I could make from this is that TV is congruent to TR. And then the next one, Again, I'm given some sides that are congruent. So for the next one, RQ, which is right here, and RS are congruent. And again, the triangle that contains those two sides are right here. And then the two base angles that would be congruent are these guys down here. And again, there are two different angle Qs going on and two different S's, so I have to name it with 3 letters. So I can name it as angle RSQ. And then the other angle would be RQS. And then for number 13, last one using this figure, they are giving me that angle SRV down here, and SVR are congruent. And again, the triangle that has those two angles are right here. And then I'm going to use the converse of my base angles theorem, and I can state that SV is congruent to RS. So SV and SR. Next, it wants me to find the values of X and Y from this figure. So this is where I'm going to use those corollaries, or at least one of them. If I have a triangle that's equiangular, then I also know it's equilateral. So in this triangle right here, since all angles are the same, then I also know it's equilateral, and all these angles are the same, all the sides are the same. And then this triangle over here, notice I've got congruent base angles. So then this also tells me that the sides opposite them are congruent. So then this one is going to be congruent to this one. So now all of the purple dashes are the same size. And notice this purple one has a length on it. So in order to find the value of y, I'm going to set 5y plus 1 equal to 26. So I can find y by subtracting 1. 5y equals 25, divide by 5, and y equals 5. Now, also in my equiangular triangle, if you know that the 3 angles of a triangle are always going to add up to be 180, and if you have 3 congruent angles, we can divide that 180 by 3, and each angle in an equiangular triangle, each one of these are going to be 60 degrees. Now to find the value of X, I'm going to reach back to where I learned about my linear pair or my straight angle and realize that this is a straight line or a straight angle. So I know that 8x plus 60 is going to equal 180 because it's a linear pair. And there's supplements. So I'll subtract 60. 8x equals 120. And then now I'm going to divide by 8. And x equals 15. So my two answers are 15 for x and 5 for y. Yeah. So here is an example of a proof using side, side, side. Notice you were given 2 of the pieces you needed. You just had to bring in the third, and they brought in the reflexive side, and then that was the only thing they needed to add. Like when you're writing it, your given could be in one statement. So now number 15, again, this question's not going to be on the test where I'm going to ask you, can you use side, side, side? It's going to say, which shortcut can you use? And you're going to either use one of the 5 or the answer could be not congruent. So for this one, number 15, notice we've only got one thing that's given to me. The only other thing I can come up with is this reflexive side. So this would not be enough information to use any of the shortcuts, even, and especially here where they ask side, side, side. So this one is no congruence. We do not have enough information. They could be congruent, but what's given to us is not enough information. So remember, to use hypotenuse leg, we need to first establish, do we have a right angle? And if we do, then we have to put in our proof that we're dealing with right triangles. Then from there, we need to look for a congruence on a leg and a congruence on the hypotenuse. So the leg is marked. I've got the right angle. I just have to come up with the hypotenuse. And that would have been my reflexive side. So this does have enough information. And now I'm going to write a proof. So statements and reasons. So number one, I'm going to state all the given. That angle W and angle Y are right angles. Then I can also state that WX is congruent to YZ. And this was what was given to me. The next thing I need to do is I can pull in my reflexive here. I can state that XZ is congruent to XZ, and that's what I already marked in the picture because they're reflexive. And now I need to establish that they're right triangles, so I can also state that WXZ and triangle YZX are right triangles, and this would be definition of a right triangle. And now I have my three pieces listed in my proof. You have to list that. You have to show the leg, the hypotenuse, and that you're working with a right triangle. Now I've got enough information, so my last statement is that triangle WXZ is congruent to triangle YZX, and that reason is hypotenuse leg. Last two that we learned were angle side angle and angle angle side. Here's an example of angle angle side. All right, so here it wants us to know, can we prove that these two triangles are congruent using angle angle side? Again, on the test, it's not going to tell you which one to check. You just have to decide which one of the 5 shortcuts you can use. So for number 17, notice I've got an angle that's marked, which matches H, and then F matches J, and then FG matches JK. So this one is enough, just with what was labeled in the picture, to use angle angle side. We didn't even have to come up with anything on our own. However, you will have to come up with the stuff on your own. I'm not going to give you all 3 pieces. You'll have to come up with the other piece or pieces. So statements, reasons. This one, all you're going to do is list the given and then go right to your congruency statement. So here, the given was angle E, congruent to angle H, angle F, congruent to angle J, and side FG is congruent to JK. And this was all given, so we didn't have to look for anything on our own. So we can say that angle or triangle EFG is congruent to triangle HJK. Okay, everything. Notice here, I have an angle that's marked and a side. These are not touching, so I can't bring in a reflexive. They're not touching where they're vertical. So only having 2 pieces marked in each triangle is not enough information to prove any of the shortcuts. So this one would be not enough or no congruence. And then number 19, now they want you to use angle side angle. Notice I've got 2 angles marked as congruent, and I can always bring in my reflexive side when they touch. So this is enough information using angle side angle. So again, I would state all the given, but then also add in a step for the reflexive, and then go right to my statement. So statements, reasons, and again, the given. And I need to name these angles that are pictured here with the congruency marks with 3 letters. I can't just use 1 letter on these. So I can call this one over here. I'm going to name these 2 first. So this will be PLN, and then this one will be MLN. So let me go ahead and put that into the proof. So angle PLN is congruent to angle MLN. And then I'm going to do the other one that's over there by the N, PNL. Notice N's the middle letter. And then MNL. And this is given. And then the next thing I'm going to add in is the reflexive. LN, or you can say NL, it doesn't matter, is congruent to itself. And this would be reflexive. And then now my congruency statement. That triangle LPN is congruent to triangle LMN. And this would have been angle side angle. Then number 20, is there enough information? Well, I got some parallel lines here. Yes. Got parallel. This can be my transversal, which would create alternate interior here. And then I could do the reflexive, but that's all I can do. Parallel lines are not congruent, so I can't say that those red ones are congruent. They're just parallel. So this one is not enough information with what was given to me. And then the last lesson was using this new acronym. And again, here is the statement, corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. So this is the C, the P, the C, the T, and the C. So this reason is CPCTC. Corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. So what you have to do when you want to use this, you have to first show that the triangles are congruent using one of the shortcuts. Then you can go back and use CPCTC to add in any congruent segments or angles. So for example, on number 21, in order to show that K is congruent to N, I would have first needed to show that the 2 triangles are congruent. And notice everything was given to me. So if I'm writing a proof for number 21, statements and reasons, I'm going to state all the given, all those congruency marks. This was all my given that I pulled off of the picture. So I was given 2 sides congruent as well as the angle. So notice this is going to be side angle side. So I'm going to go ahead and state the 2 triangles that are congruent. So triangle HJK is congruent to triangle LMN, and that reason is side angle side. And now to go back and show that angle K is congruent to angle N, because the triangles are congruent, now any other piece that doesn't have a congruency mark is also congruent, and that reason is CPCTC. So for number 22, it's again asking me not to prove the 2 triangles are congruent as my final step, but to show that angles 1 and 2 are congruent. But I'm going to first show that the triangles are congruent. So let me zoom in here to the picture. So the 2 triangles I'm going to show are congruent initially are going to be this one right here, and then this one. After I show that these 2 triangles are congruent, then I can go back and use my CPCTC and state that I have another corresponding part that's congruent, and then I'll also bring in my vertical angles. So let's go ahead and first just get the blue and the pink triangle as stated as congruent. So let me go ahead and set up my statements and my reasons. So number 1, the given is all these congruency marks. So I can state here that SV is congruent to TV. And I was also given SQ congruent to TQ. And that's what was given to me. Now what I'm going to add in is this reflexive side, that QV is congruent to QV, and that's going to be reflexive. And now I have enough congruency marks to show that the pink and the blue triangle are congruent by side, side, side. So then I can now state that triangle QSV is congruent to triangle QTV, and the reason is side, side, side. Now what I'm going to do is show that I've got this angle here congruent to this angle here by CPCTC. So I got to name it with 3 letters. So I can now say that QSV is congruent to angle QTV, and this is CPCTC, because the triangles are congruent, so all the other parts are congruent. The next thing I'm going to state is that the angles are vertical. So I can say that angle 1 is congruent to angle QSV, and I'm going to add a 6th one here. Or no, I'm going to add this together at the same statement. Then angle 2 is congruent to angle QTV. These are vertical. Vertical angles congruence. And then my last statement is that angle 1 is congruent to angle 2, and that reason is transitive or substitution. So again, don't focus on this review or the other review. Go back, review everything. The warm-ups are always an excellent source. So, or substitution. So again, remember, don't focus on just the reviews. Use the reviews. Use your warm-ups. Use your notes and your homework. You also have the resources on the Big Ideas website. Remember, you can also go to the skills trainer and you can always see if there are practice problems within that. Not every lesson is in there, but it does have quite a bit of information. So this is on the entire chapter 5. And again, always use everything that is provided for you. So the only homework tonight is to study. That second review there is optional. It does not need to be submitted.